Have you ever been outside on a still summer's day and a sudden gust of wind picks up from nowhere, gives you a bit of a shiver, makes you feel something's a bit off? Well, in the folklore of these islands, that's sometimes called a fairy wind. And the idea is a whole host of the hidden company has come charging past you, unseen to us mere mortals. The fairy wind, the she. So this is a folk tale that sort of plays around with that idea. So here it goes. Long ago, but not so long ago, there was a certain Cornishman, and he was a sailor on a ship that sailed to many fine and precious places overseas. Now, this Cornishman, he was extremely handsome, very good looking, so good looking, as the old women say, that he is as rare as a sea eagle. Not just good looking, though. This was a kind man, a very good natured man, a very generous man, always in a good mood when others around him were grumbling. And he was a very competent sailor. It was said that he was worth 5 regular men on deck. For this reason, the captain, the skipper of that ship, valued this Cornishman very highly. Now, you need to know about this Cornishman. He spoke the old language, Cornish, and knew a lot of the old ways. And he had a certain canny way with the sea and with the weather because of that. He always knew usually knew when a bad weather front was coming in, and he was good luck to have aboard. And he could sing. Oh, he could sing. He could play the fiddle, he could play the squeeze blocks, he could play the banjo, he could sing all the old songs in the old tongue, and he was a delight to all the crew. Most popular man aboard. Such a generous soul was he, this Cornishman. Now, in this story, this ship had been journeying for many years to the Spice Islands and all over the place. And finally, it was on its return leg across the Atlantic Ocean to Britain. And that Cornishman, he was looking forward to see his old mum, who was a widow, bent and crooked and old, who he had left all alone because he wanted to give her what little money he had earned from his voyage, just to give her a bit of joy in her last years. He didn't know if she would still be alive. Now they were coming in over the North Atlantic, and there they could see land. That Cornishman could see the green hills and the yellow gorse of his homeland. He could see Cornwall calling him, and the seagulls were overhead, and they were a joyous sound to those sailors, just white against the blue sky. And that Cornishman was so joyful, he began to sing beautiful songs of the old country, and it put a smile on the heart of every man in that crew. But they say that 3 things cannot be trusted: the king, the sea, and the weather. And here they were, within spitting distance of the Cornish coast, and suddenly a storm came out of nowhere. The sky just darkened. The vagaries of the British weather, if you are from these islands, you will know that a dark weather front can come in from nowhere. And suddenly that sea was heaving, great slate grey waves rising up and down, the sky black. Suddenly that ship was blown away, so the coastline couldn't be seen at all, and they were just barreling like a cork on top of these waves all through the day, all through a black and hellish night, and into the next day. They were up and down, the seas were awash with vomit, the very walls were creaking, seawater was starting to come through the vessel, and surely every man knew that he was going to be drowned and lost at sea forever. Well, dark times, desperate times, call for desperate measures. And those sailors were a superstitious lot. And sometimes, not a lot of people know this, but sometimes if you know all is lost and you are going to be swallowed by the sea, sometimes it's necessary to sacrifice one of the crew for the good of all. This has been done for a very, very long time. Back in the day, long, long ago, perhaps if the land was failing, a king would sacrifice himself so the crops could grow again. Similar kind of thing. So, at the captain's behest, that crew drew lots. Who drew the short straw? You guessed it, the Cornishman, the most popular man aboard. The captain, though, he loved that Cornishman dearly. He was like a lucky charm for the ship. He had proved himself time and time again on the adventures of that ship, his courage, his bravery, his goodness. And the captain said, no, this can't be right. Do the lot again. So they did. The same result. The Cornishman drew the short straw. Again, said the skipper of the ship. Same thing happened again. Again. No, that's enough, said the Cornishman. He knew his lot was up. Well, if I just need to sacrifice myself for the good of all this crew, I will happily do that. And he walked to the prow of that ship with the rain coming down and lashing him, just smoking the last of his pipe. Nonchalantly, without a care in the world, happily accepting his fate. And he took one last drag of that pipe and tossed it over his shoulder. He wouldn't be needing that again. And then a great wave, huge mountain of a wave, rose up behind that ship. And that Cornishman in his other hand had his little sailor's knife, to cut up rations or tobacco. And he just chucked it over the other shoulder and it went just cut into the side of that wave. And suddenly there was a shuddering screech and maybe a streak of red across that wave, and it's like the whole sky and sea that were merged together just shuddered and squealed, and then the sea went straight down and became flat like glass. The storm had completely died, but in a way it was even more terrifying because the sea did not have a single ripple in it, and they could not see land. The sky was still dark, the sun was starting to go down, and it was just glassy flat, and the sun went down, and then the stars came up, glassy flat. It's like they were stuck in another world. And the sun rose the next day, high in the sky. There were no birds, there were no other vessels, there was no land, just sea stretching out like a mirror into the horizon. And the men became very, very afraid. And the sun was starting to dip down in the sky the next day. And the captain ordered one of the men to go up into the crow's nest with a spyglass to see if he could see anything. Nothing. Then there, man cried down to the crew below, there is someone coming out of the horizon. And he rushed down that rigging and said there was a man on horseback riding across the sea on a white steed. Along that orangey golden path across the sea cast by the setting sun, a white horse. And it got closer and closer and closer, trotting along the surface of the water, making little ripples until he drew up level with the boat. And he just climbed up the rigging and onto deck. And he was dressed strangely, this man. He was tall, he was stark looking with dark eyes, dark hair. He was wearing strange clothing in green and gold, in a fashion that had fallen out of fashion about 300 years earlier. Well, this man asked the captain for an audience below deck. So he went down, he was given wine, he was given some food, and he said to the captain in very polite terms, using somewhat archaic language, that he would need one member of that crew for a day and a night, no longer, if that was all right. And the captain said he would part with any crewman except this Cornishman. Indeed, 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 said the stranger from across the sea, that is exactly the man I have come for. But you have my word, Captain, that your ship will not leave this spot for a day and a night, and within that time I will be back with your deckhand here, this Cornishman. Well, reluctantly, the captain agreed, and with that the Cornishman got on the back of that white horse, and he followed that fairy rider across the sea into the setting sun, riding on and on and on across this flat glass ocean, and then this great wave came up, and zoom, a door opened in it, and they marched straight through, and it zoom, sealed up behind them, and that Cornishman found himself in another world beneath the sea. It was like they were traveling through a glass corridor, down and down, and the fish were moving above, and he could see the great fretwork ceiling of the ocean above, creating these strange shadows, and down they went to the ocean floor, and he could breathe, and there were strange plants and flowers and trees and most unimaginable hills and forests and fruit the size of his head made of gold and silver. He was agog, and then he came to this great city made of sparkling white and crystal, and there were people in all these fair coloured clothes playing these musical instruments and singing and welcoming them in. It was like he had come to the land of the ever young, or the land beneath the sea that he had heard his mother tell him in stories when he was a wee boy. Eventually they came to a palace, and that fairy rider dismounted, and the Cornishman followed suit, and they walked into the central chamber, and there were many people mourning, many fair people weeping, and they came into this, what must be a royal chamber, and there on a marble slab propped up by silken pillows was this beautiful woman, and in her chest was a dagger. And when that Cornishman entered, she looked at him in his eyes and said, "For the love of God, take this knife from my breast. It is only you that can do it." And without thinking, he instinctively stepped forward and pulled out that dagger, and there was a collective gasp from everyone there. And then this sigh of relief, and that wound on that fairy queen, for that is what she was, sealed up. And then shame fell upon that Cornishman, for he looked at the dagger in his hand. You guessed it, his own name was carved in the handle. Do not feel shame for what you have done, said the now healed fairy queen, because if you had not done what you have done, I would have drowned every single one of you. Strange, strange thing to say, oh lady, said the Cornishman. Well, love is a foolish thing, she said, because from the first moment I spied you on the deck of your ship, when I was flying high as a seagull, as you were coming into land, I fell in love with you. And when you sang that song so beautifully of your homeland, I knew I had to have you. And the only way I knew was to drown every one of you so your soul could be mine forever. Please, please forgive me. There is no need for forgiveness, said that Cornishman, because I, just hearing you now, have fallen hopelessly in love with you. And things move quickly in these stories, but the two of them were married, and for a year and a day they spent time in blessed union together in that kingdom beneath the waves. But time travels differently on the surface as it does below, and the time came for that Cornishman to return, and he did not want to. But her brother had given the captain of that ship his word that that Cornishman would only be gone for a year and a day. Our time, clock time. But do not despair. You may be away from me for a year and a day, said his new bride, but when that time comes, we will be together in a year and a day. Keep your eye on the horizon. Trust me, I will come. And she filled his pockets with gold and said, that is for your mother, your poor, poor old mother. Buy her a house, buy her a bit of land. Wait there by the sea for me. I will come. A year and a day, I promise. And reluctantly, that Cornishman left his bride, got back on that milk-white steed and rode with his brother-in-law back through that crystal tunnel, up on the surface and towards that vessel, which was in the same place. And remarkably, only a day and a night had passed in that whole year and a day that Cornishman had spent in matrimony beneath the sea. The captain was overjoyed. It was this strange Cornishman who was returned with this strange attire from 3 centuries ago. Well, half a day's sail and they were back in Cornish shallow seas. And that Cornishman, he went to the little hovel where he had last seen his mother and walked in. And of course, she did not recognise him. And he said, "What? Don't you recognise your own boy?" to his dear mother. And she was overjoyed. She got up on her little wobbly knees and embraced him and wept and wept and wept. And they stayed up all night drinking Cornish ale, talking about all his adventures in other lands. But he did not say anything of his time beneath the waves. It did not seem right. And he was starting to think himself, maybe it had been a dream, in spite of these fine garments he was wearing. Well, shortly after that, they went looking for a new house, and that Cornishman bought his mother a nice plot of land with some sheep and had her a nice house built, and he had a little house on the side as well. And things were looking good for a while. But soon that Cornishman began to get sick, lovesick, frail. And he would spend all his time composing a new song, a beautiful song about this fairy queen that lived beneath the sea. I don't know, his mother couldn't make hide nor tail out of it, but nothing, nobody, none of his friends, none of the villagers, not his mother could snap him out of this strange mood. He would not eat, he would not sleep, he would not take ale. He was just working on this song, this beautiful, haunting song, night after night after night, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, until finally that song was ready, and he sat out with his mother outside on the porch, looking at the sea, and it was a bit of a drich, miserable kind of day, and he began to play this song, and it was beautiful. It was the most beautiful song he had ever played. It was the most beautiful song his mother had ever heard, and she knew the old tradition of the old Cornish folk songs, mark you. It was beautiful, and the wind seemed to pick up as he played the song, and the clouds seemed to melt away, and the sun played upon the water, and the wind picked up and picked up and picked up as he sung the verses of his love that was coming. And sure enough, something was coming. The light was moving across the water, the sun was going down, the wind was coming up, the wind was picking up, and his mother was growing afeard, and she looked out across the sea, and there was a great questing wave, and there she could swear she could see a woman, golden hair, riding a white steed towards the shore. She blinked and turned around to see if her son had seen the same thing, but he was lost in a reverie, lost in the magic of the fairy wind. The reason I really like that story is because sometimes when I'm talking to my mum, the wind picks up. Maybe you've found this with a loved one that has passed on. And sometimes it feels like just the pattern of the wind is a way for those that have crossed over to the other side to make contact with us. Just an idea. So that's also an interesting folktale because it's clearly only set in the last couple of hundred years, but has lots of resonances with a lot of earlier Celtic folklore. You might recognise some bits of Irish or Orcadian myth and folklore in here. For example, the story of Oisin and Knave journeying across the sea. I've told that story on this channel, I'll put a link to it. Or the story of the seal hunter. Very, very similar, also told that on this channel. I'll put a link to both these stories here if you want to hear more Celtic folklore. Thank you very much, my friends. See you again soon.